one of the biggest challenges that we've always had in her business is just getting good COGS data. Literally, cost of goods sold, do that in a reliable manner.
Adii, how you doing, buddy?
I'm really good. It's really great to finally be here, Kaden.
Yeah, man, it's great to chat. I have listened to, I feel like 8 or 9 of your podcast episodes, Life Profitability, and have really enjoyed them. You tend to ask people how they introduce themselves, and whenever I'm listening to that, I'm thinking to myself, and then you'll have a whole conversation around it, the labels they use and things like that, and I'm like, I want to know how you introduce yourself. So that's the first question is how do you introduce yourself?
Oh, wow. Thanks for putting me on the spot. But it's totally fair because you're right. Like that is exactly the way I start every podcast. I guess these days I introduce myself as an entrepreneur that has built and sold 2 software businesses, currently working on a new software business. And I'm also a soon to be published author. And beyond that, like things that I'm proud of, I'm a husband, I'm a dad, I consider myself a family man, and I'm 100% a wine snob, which I balance out by also running a lot when I'm not injured.
Really? So you're a big wine guy.
I'm a wine geek, right? Like beyond the taste, and just the kind of obviously the buzz that comes with alcohol, right? Like I totally geek out on like all aspects about the wine, from the actual making, the kind of the heritage thereof, the family stories that normally come with that, all the way to kind of the branding and the business components, to that. It's just this incredibly kind of nice, almost melting pot of so many different perspectives in a single bottle. And then it's obviously amplified by, the company, whether that's me listening to some Leonard Cohen late at night when I should be sleeping, or having kind of, my best mates, and over and then sharing, a bottle of wine. So yeah, just like wine does all of those things for me.
That's really cool. I wish I was a wine snob. Like it's like a classy thing to be into, but I'm like one of these guys, give me whatever white wine you have, it's fine. Like I'm like a margarita guy. I'm like the most uninteresting guy at when it comes to alcohol. So I'm a little jealous there.
There's always a start, by the way. Just throwing that out there.
There's always a start. There's always what, like, you're doing a lot of things, right? You've got the podcast, the book, the business that you're building, Cogsy. What is, like, you're like a very, I want to talk about work-life balance, right? Which you're trying to kind of rebrand that term. But you're like a very like balanced guy, and you've gone through these phases of like work, and then you've talked about like hitting burnout and sabbatical stuff and like finding balance. So like, what does your schedule look like day to day? What does like your mind space look like as you're doing all these different things?
Yeah, I think the kind of the latter part is probably easier to answer, right, Karen? Which is, in terms of mind space, I try and focus on things that, like I try and follow my energy, right? And I know, as kind of esoteric as that sounds, right? I think I've learned over the years that if something doesn't feel right, like there's probably something off. And I think that's probably the best thing that I've learned in the last couple of years. And kind of when I say the best thing is it relates to mindfulness, that I stumbled into literally at a time in my life about 4 years ago where my whole life fell apart, right? And the thing that I learned through mindfulness is just this awareness of things, like, just catching the thought train or train of thoughts before it becomes a bigger thing. And I think that's how I feel about energy. So when I think about working and I think about my ambition, like that's what I try and follow. Like, and I thus try and, find some good tension between having habits, routines, having some structure, right? And more around having space. Like that's what I try and create. Like, every single day, I try and create some space, which kind of translates both ways, which is I will have some scheduled things in my kind of work day, whereas I will have some free space to fill up in whatever way I see possible, but it also relates to how kind of that interplay between, Adii being at work and Adii being, because I work from home like exclusively, even pre-pandemic, right? So how kind of Adii, the work Adii, the work mindset Adii kind of bleeds into the rest of my life at home with my family, right? So I try and follow, kind of have that space, have the structure, but then follow energy. And if the energy is off, then I back off literally, right? And sometimes when the energy is there, I also follow that, which often means like sometimes like the thing I love on a Saturday or Sunday morning is, after a run, for example, or after doing something with family, the house will be quiet, my mind will be quiet, and I'll just feel at peace, and I'll actually sit down and I'll bash out like an hour and a half worth of work, right? And that on the surface, that sounds very contradictory to this, don't work on weekends, like, you're a workaholic, but actually that's me pursuing just that energy that I have in that moment effectively.
Yeah. That's so interesting, dude. There's so many things I want to jump into there. That the energy thing is something I've been thinking about like almost nonstop. I've been doing this like daily journaling exercise for 30 days. Actually, today was day 30, so I'm finally done. But it was basically every day, what are the things that you fill you with enthusiasm, or I think about that as like give you energy? What are the things that drain your energy, and what did you learn about yourself? And I've been doing that every day, and I think I've been learning about what are the things I need to focus on, and that's kind of trained me to think that way in my day to day. Like, and so I'm like constantly thinking about that. But I was curious. You mentioned like your life almost fell apart, and I think you talked a little bit about that on some of the podcasts you've done. But I was curious to know a little bit more about what that looked like, to the extent that you're comfortable, sharing.
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of the biggest component there was that I convinced myself that I needed to divorce my wife, right? And last year, for example, like we last year we were married 10 years, and like getting to that point, and I mean, I think that's like, divorce and all the kind of subsequent dominoes that fall over as a result of that is significant, right? I mean, in an instant, one's life can change immeasurably, right? So, and I said, I kind of the reason I kind of, and I've always kind of used euphemisms around that. So well done for whatever you've done to pull that out of me. And I mean that as a compliment, by the way. I think like the point being in that, and the reason I found myself there where I thought that this was the only solution is I was, my therapist helped me understand that my mind was on fire, like constantly. I was constantly in this fight or flight mode, right? Which is, as an entrepreneur that's ambitious, that's great, right? Because that fires you, like you literally kind of, you go, right? Because the mind works really well in that way. But then for other things, like things that tend to be non-obvious or softer or just not this kind of linear path, it doesn't work really well. And I literally backed myself in a corner of that way, where I thought that the only way kind of, I'm not going to say that. Like the only way to get out of that corner was, in that sense, to separate, to divorce, right? Which I now know is like, that thinking was totally subpar. Like that was never the solution, because ultimately I would have still been stuck after that with myself. I just would not have a spouse to blame my issues on, essentially.
Right. Man, that's that's heavy. I mean, it's such a common thing, right? It's one of those things that I don't know what the number is, over 50%, and it's so easy to be frustrated with things. I know myself, I've been seeing that getting a little bit of that with like mindfulness and stuff, that outside perspective of where I'm frustrated with something, and then you can start to see when it's you and it's not them, and stuff like that, and been thinking about that a lot. But that's powerful, man. I mean, it's interesting how as entrepreneurs, you get this level of success, and then it's like you run into a wall. It seems to be a pattern, like you think that you're going to sell the business and go live on a beach happily ever after, and it never quite happens, Yeah. I don't know what that's about.
Yeah. Well, and Kenny, I think like the biggest, part of it, because I recently went through that exact same kind of thought process again, right? I sold Conversio to Campaign Monitor August 2019. I spent a little bit more than a year with Campaign Monitor after the acquisition. Left them September last year, and like during those kind of last couple of months when I knew that it was about time that I was going to leave, started doing that thought experiment, like what do I want? Like what do I want to do next, right? Because at that stage, I've had literally the financial success to basically decide what I want to do. I'm a very privileged position, right? So I went through this whole thought experiment of, hey, like I'd already been at that stage when I left Campaign Monitor. I think the book was pretty much done and in final editing, for example. So I figured like, okay, I can push the book. I could become like, book author / keynote speaker, run workshops, that kind of thing. That is interesting, right? I already do some coaching within Dan Martell's SaaS Academy, coaching other founders. I enjoy that. Thought about adding that or doing that, more of that. Adding consultancy there perhaps. So we kind of looked at multiple different things, and I eventually decided that, hey, I want to build a new SaaS business. So I should look for ideas. And a big part of why SaaS ultimately, beyond the actual idea of Cogsy, right, was all about, I felt like those other paths, and by the way, now I think of it, the other path that I considered was just going down the investment route. Just actively kind of, investing at this stage, my own and other people's money probably, right? And the reason why I ultimately decided against that was I love building a team. I love having kind of people around me that have shared passion and shared vision and this interest in this idea. And I didn't feel like those other paths that I would be able to get that. And for me, at least, that's part of that equation. So when you ask a question of like entrepreneur running to, against the wall or getting to a top of a mountain and then seeking out a new mountain, I at least know that one of those reasons why I always seek out the new mountain to climb is kind of that team idea that I have there. That I know that. The other thing that comes to mind is I absolutely thrive on a challenge. Like that's what kind of makes me want to build businesses, because the challenge part is very much aligned with my curiosity, my thirst for learning. So those are the things that I've come to know about myself, that I'm very aware about, and that's how I essentially pick what I do next.
I love it. The Cogsy thing is super interesting. So so Cogsy does sort of inventory optimization for e-commerce merchants or retailers in general, merchants. And I, going back like I want to say 8 years or something like that, I was a developer in-house with an e-commerce store, and I was looking to find like, oh, how do you forecast inventory? And I looked into it. There was like nothing out there. NetSuite was the only option for it. And I remember like posting to Quora and like looking for answers. And it's one of these things that's been in the back of my mind literally ever since then. I think I've talked about it a couple different times. And so when I saw this, I was like, and I know Cogsy's doing a bunch of different stuff, not just, there's like buy side optimization, sell side optimization, and things like that. So it might not just really be focused on inventory forecasting the way I'm thinking about it. But anyways, when I saw that, I was like, this is it, But so how did you get the idea for Cogsy, and what's the plan for it?
Yeah. The idea, so context here, I mean, the idea goes back years ago. So my wife runs a big e-commerce business in South Africa locally, like doing hair extensions and hair care range. And
cool.
I found myself in that position of being CTO, essentially, that's a glorified title. Sorry, I am the support agent on call for anything technical.
There you go.
Let's not. There is a hierarchy in that sense.
CTO makes you feel better about yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. So I've been supporting her on that front, and the further context here is I actually have I studied accounting at university. So my degree is in accounting. That's where I came from. It was my dad's dream for me to be a chartered accountant. I luckily dodged that bullet. But I've always been like. And that's a whole different story, but I've always been kind of financially savvy in that sense, like accounting savvy. I understand the principles, I can apply it. For Conversio, I did kind of our own kind of bookkeeping and accounting up until acquisition. So In my
Wow.
wife's business, she uses an inventory management solution that I will not name because I don't like criticizing other people's products, at least in public where there's records.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of the biggest challenges that we've always had in her business is just getting good COGS data. Literally, cost of goods sold, do that in a
Yep.
reliable manner, right? And we literally have like spending years, so much, so many hours working with the kind of software provider. And my wife's business is on Shopify, right? So people can make their own assumptions. There aren't that many of these solutions out there, and they're literally on record, Kellen, telling us that don't trust the numbers that we give you. Don't use them in your tax filings. We're not a financial reporting tool. And I'm like, okay, please explain, right? So this happens
Let's
about
flesh that out.
yes, right. So this happens about 2-3 years ago, probably 3 years ago, and I look at the idea that I'm like, the solution obviously is, I know how to build software, not myself, but I know how to get a team together to build software. I should totally build a competitor.
By the way, are
and
you a developer by background?
No, I
No.
mean, I built the very first theme that kind of ultimately became Woo Themes before I met my eventual co-founders, Magnus and Mark. And I can dabble a bit in kind of HTML, CSS. For anyone that is technically out there, back then my PHP learning curve tapped out when the next step would have been PHP classes. And I looked at a few tutorials for classes and I was like, yeah, no, I'm not that interested in coding anymore. So like I can still, like, if you give me something on my own blog, for example, and I needed to change some HTML, like I can still do that. But like anything beyond that, like I have better people to do that.
Right.
Anyway, so we look at this and I'm like, this is totally like, I should build some kind of accounting / inventory thing here because there's space in the market. I think I can do it better because I'm totally obsessed with, like, that's one thing I got from my dad, who is in that kind of realm of financial accounting as well. Like attention to detail, right? And it needs to be right. There's a single way and it needs to be right. And then back then, like that just didn't make sense. Within Conversio, it would have been a distraction for the team. And I didn't think like I could serve two gods. It didn't make sense to try and build it separately. And I ultimately decided, and you know what, this is not as sexy. Fast forward a couple of years, I'm now in a space, having worked, like built software, marketing software, which is probably the most congested corner of the internet, and knowing how hard that is. And I was like, when I started looking at new ideas, I was like, what can I build that does not qualify itself as marketing at all? And that's when the penny dropped that, hey, we had this idea back then. And when I first pitched it to my wife again, she's like, well, I've got the perfect name for you as well. You should call it Cogsy. So the name there, perfectly derived from Cogs. It's her name that she came up with. So it kind of went full circle there. I think the only thing that's changed since is where I thought that we would start with building those foundations, right? I would say the financial part of inventory management, right? Processing purchase orders, calculating COGS, that kind of thing. Like we're not going to do that. We're instead going to focus on two other pillars, which is kind of helping brands buy better. So forecasting being one of those things, and then tying that back kind of into selling better. I think my whole philosophy there is, as software makers, we constantly build these incredibly sophisticated, powerful tools, and then we put it into unsophisticated users' hands. And the data, the insight, the recommendation is there, but the action is sometimes just so far out of grasp for some users. And we saw that with email marketing, right? Where like most of these things is drag and drop, click here, does that, WYSIWYG kind of thing. And they still get stuck, right? Because there's still a gap between, I theoretically understand what needs to happen here. I don't know exactly how to implement it in my business. So with Cogsy, like I want to make sure that we tie any insight, any kind of, purchasing decision directly to a sales decision, right? And essentially make sure that cash flow loop, which is ultimately what it comes down to, is, purring and whizzing away like a Rolls Royce.
I love it. So what does that look like, tying every purchasing decision to a sales decision? Like what is that gonna look like practically?
So the simplest example I have is the following, Helen. So take, for example, so part of what we're building for V1, and then the second part that I'll describe is definitely kind of a subsequent feature, right? But part of what we built for V1 is a prioritization matrix of all of your SKUs. So for anyone that has multiple SKUs, you probably, kind of the basic version of this would be ABC analysis. There's other solutions that do ABC analysis, right? Essentially just grades your products based on the value they're contributing to the business at any given stage, right? A being bestsellers, C being things that you should might already be obsolete, right? So we've expanded on that, built more of a prioritization kind of matrix. And one of the things that we actually consider is we look at the kind of LTV for when a product is purchased by a first-time customer, right? Because the theory there is a product with a high kind of first-time customer LTV is a bestseller, right? You should never run out of that product, right? You don't necessarily know at that stage when that customer is going to come back and make their second, third, fourth purchase, but it's an indication that when they purchase this product for whatever reason as well, right? Cogsy does not know that, but they have a high LTV, right? So built this prioritization matrix, and in the kind of the lowest, crappiest quadrants is your obsolete items. And a simple way of then, kind of beyond that, the basic prioritization framework here, by the way, is that you allocate more of your working capital and available cash to the higher up kind of, categorized or classified SKUs, right? For those obsolete SKUs, a simple tool is to build kind of to have a persistent kind of clearance or specials collection on your Shopify store, and constantly just when a product falls into that category, you just shift it there. Like Cogsy will automatically move it there for you. We will mark it down based on rules that you set. Like if we have your COGS data, available, for example, like a simple rule would be mark this down at cost and just get rid of it, right? Because at that stage, when a product is obsolete, it's more important for you to have that extra cash, and you can rather invest it in growth channels, right? Than it just sitting there in a warehouse somewhere. Yep. So that is how we hope to tie these things together. That's one, kind of one example that we have there, right? So that's, we're definitely building. I don't know what timeline that is, but like that is one example that we want to build there. And as I said, it's all about that finding that constant loop between spending money, making sure it comes back in, and then spending it again, whether it's inventory again or on other growth channels.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I just remembered when I built the email marketing software for Magento, that was a business that got acquired. The first version of it, I wanted to charge a percentage of profit, not revenue, but profit. Because in Magento, there's a cost of goods field on the product. And so that was the first version of it, because I just wanted it to, it was like at the end of the day as a business, it's profit that matters. It's not revenue, right? People get that twisted sometimes. And then what happened is that the initial couple of merchants happened to have that data. But then as I started to grow, other people just didn't have it. They didn't want to put the data in the back end. They didn't want to take the time to put their cost of goods in. So it just became kind of impractical. Then I just went to charging off of revenue. So is the idea, sorry, go ahead.
No, and I just say like that boggles my mind, by the way, right? I've spoken with so many, like through Conversio days, like spoken with so many businesses that can't tell me, like when I ask them, listen, what's your average kind of gross margin here? Like, what's gross margin, right? I don't even know how to calculate it, right? And like for me, that's scary, because we also know at the same time that the merchants don't know that, or the businesses don't know that. They're spending loads of money, whether it's on Facebook ads, Google ads, whatever. And I just know, like, if you don't know your gross margin, there's no way whether you really know that this kind of acquisition channel that you have going here is by any means contributing positively to the business or not, right? Because they're seeing those things in silos, and they're measuring it on top line revenue, that is, which can't, like, maybe their margins are just so big and their unit economics on their ads is performing so well and it works, but that's flying blind, right? And like, that's just not, I don't know how I can build a business like that, for example.
Yeah. So is the idea that they'll just go in and just plug in does Shopify have a way to put cost of goods directly into the product management in the back end?
Yeah, so it was a recent change, right? So I don't know when. So it might be like 6 months ago, it might be 2 years ago. I just never noticed it. But yes, every product listing now has a single cost of goods, or I think I call it just say cost price, and it's a static number, which is also like that changes, right? I mean, depending on, there's multiple different ways of calculating a cost of your products. I think moving average cost is probably the best way to do it. but a single static number. Interesting enough, like
What is moving average cost? Sorry to interrupt
yeah,
you.
no. So moving average cost in that sense would be if you it essentially takes if I order 10 that I'm going to do quick math on air now, which will either
Uh-oh.
make me look really smart or really stupid. So say for example you ordered 10 products at $10, right? And another 10 same SKU, right? So 10 units, let's call them units, 10 units at $10, another 10 units at $20. You've got 20 units cost you $300. So the moving average cost there is $15. It's neither 10
Oh,
nor
okay.
20. So you kind of
okay.
average that. You kind of average that out. Like other ways of doing
Blend
it
it all together.
is
Yep.
exactly right. So I think the two other prominent ones would be either kind of last in, first out, or first in, first out, right? So just taking that last, but those are actually technically also much harder to pull off in an inventory system. So the moving average cost is just a much simpler way for you to essentially constantly order and reorder from your vendors and keep that number up to date in aggregate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the inventory forecasting, how is that going to work? Are you using a pretty basic what's it called, like algorithm to forecast that out?
Yeah, and I'm thinking how much
Regression. That's the word I was looking for. Some
yeah.
kind of a
So
regression.
so yes, we are. What we essentially do is we've got a kind of the auto machine learning mechanism that would essentially kind of when a merchant plugs into Cogsy, we run it through that. The algorithm essentially finds through 6 different kind of algorithms, right? All based on kind of regression, like time series, based analysis there, and finds the one that is kind of based on your data is the least volatile, right? And like one of those, for example, is we use Facebook's profit algorithm, right, which is open source. That's one of the kind of the options that we use there. So to be able kind of
What's that one? That's super interesting. I've never heard of that.
yeah, so Facebook profit, I didn't know about it either, right, until I started working on Cogsy, to be honest. But essentially, Facebook has created that kind of time series. And by the way, I'm not a data scientist, so I'm butchering my terms here. But essentially, what it does is it can look at kind of the past, and it will factor in seasonality to make a prediction on future. And you can essentially pass it as many kind of nodes of information as you want.
Wow, I got to check that out. Okay.
Yeah, open source.
Okay. So, sorry, I interrupted you. So you're saying that the Facebook profit was one of the ones that you'd use?
Exactly. And to be honest, Kellen, like I think the one thing that people never get from me is I really dislike how overhyped artificial intelligence and machine learning is by many startups, right? That build products, especially early stage products.
Right.
Like there's many of these chatbots, for example, that's just a kind of a combination of a bunch of if else this then whatever statements, right? It's not artificial intelligence, right? And I have a problem with that. Like I just can't bullshit people to that extent, right? So to be honest, like with Cogsy, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel on forecasting. We're leaning on the shoulders of giants. We're using best practices. Like that is not like we are not going to have like we're not going to have a prediction algorithm that is 10% better than an alternative in market. Like that's not the USP that we have here. The USP that we're going through, for is the whole package, right? That essentially, and like the messaging and positioning is evolving, but I'm imagining Cogsy to be more of a automated operations platform than merely kind of a prediction algorithm or inventory management or inventory optimization tool. So like I actually think the forecasting stuff is probably the least kind of interesting things that we will be doing this year.
Yeah, that's funny because I remember at the time thinking that like it can't be that like there's got to be some algorithms that are just existing that you could plug into to make some really useful forecasts. And I remember thinking at the time like this has got to be really doable. That's really cool. So we haven't talked about the book too much. But so when is that coming out? And what's what's the who's it going to be relevant to? What's kind of the message of the book?
Yeah. So firstly, the book is it's called Life Profitability: The New Measure of Entrepreneurial Success. It's out on 26 January after a rigorous writing and publishing process. But it's out 26 February and January, sorry. And the at the core of the book, what I'm essentially doing or trying to do, and how I present the idea and the concept of life profitability is as an augmented version of capitalism. Um, as an entrepreneur, I don't think capitalism is bad, but I also see many of its flaws, and I've experienced many of those flaws. I mean, like we chatted earlier about kind of me getting to that point of almost losing all the things that are important to me, right? And my ambition was part of that contributing factor. And what I hope to do with life profitability is kind of just shift the notion of when you think about either a professional career or building a business, not just have that thing be financially profitable, right, in the narrow sense of the word, but actually kind of be really profitable in the sense of your whole life, right? And like for me, there's a simple way. I mean, you alluded to how I'm trying to, at least on Twitter and kind of small conversations, how I've tried to shift this perspective on work-life balance, right? I mean, that for me, when I think about life profitability, I think it's very different to work-life balance, which I don't think can exist. Because proposing that work and life can be in balance, it suggests that they are independent opposite things that can ultimately balance each other out. And I just believe that, like, I think work is just part of life. Very simply, kind of, we're
Right.
not, I don't believe that we're on this earth to work, right? Like, we work because that's how society functions. But ultimately, work is just a component of life. And the way I like to think about life profitability, thus, is kind of thinking about my life portfolio and what I need to put in there. And my work and ambition is just one of those things, right? For me, like my intro probably included those other things, right? My family being my highest value. My family is important to me. My family needs to be in there. My own health, mental, emotional, physical, otherwise, that's important to me. Drinking really good wine or really great wine, or wine that I love, like those things are important to me. And I essentially need to make sure that the whole life portfolio makes sense and turns a life profit. So that's the kind of spiel I'm totally testing and kind of iterating on the elevator pitch for the book, which I've not given my
Right.
kind of many times yet.
Right. No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that because work is a part of life, so how can you balance them against each other? And I was thinking about what you said earlier about like working on a Saturday morning or something like that. And I've been doing that kind of thing as well. Like I'm a very like routine person, so there are some things like Saturday, family time. We do some stuff. Like for me to spend the whole Saturday working and not with the family would be insane. Whereas
Yeah.
in the past, I would just slip into that. But if I have like an hour, half hour where I'm feeling really excited about something, I'll do some work and then, like kind of ride that energy wave. It's like
Yeah.
I'll kind of go with that energy, but for a limited amount of time, and then boom, right into the family time without being distracted and thinking about work all the time.
Exactly. And in that sense, I think it's a like interplay, right, is a much better way of thinking about kind of work and life, right? Interplay.
Yeah.
I also think like that we spoke about awareness, like, and then having that intent, like when you feel that energy, like I'm going to work now, that is the intent here, right? And I'm intentionally
Hmm.
following that energy versus as soon as I step out of my office again and I kind of, go back to the family, my intention is to be present with them, right? So like,
Hmm.
hence why I like that kind of interplay of energies, right? Without being
Hmm.
too esoteric. But
Yeah.
yeah, like that's, like, I think those things, like those are the things I kind of touch on in the book. And I also really wanted to write the kind of book that I didn't want to write a how-to book because I hate how-to books. I absolutely hate this
Hmm.
idea that for anything in life there's a perfect blueprint and like you can just give me a checklist of 10 things, write a chapter about each, and then if I implement that, I'm going to accomplish the goal that's on the cover of the book. So
Hmm.
with life profitability, like I really doubled down on this notion that like every one of us we'll have to discover our own life profitability. And yes, like if you and I did that exercise, like there might be overlaps. I think there are certain things that are more universal, but they're probably more in the realm of like things that's hard to quantify, right? Like space. I think like having space in one's life, that's an attribute of life profitability. But how that space manifests for each of us is probably different, right? Or unique and very specific to our needs and our context, our environments. So like that kind of, again, like to your point of, working on a Saturday, like that's like, if that works for you, then that probably kind of makes sense in your life portfolio. And then no book that I can write should ever discourage that.
Yeah. What is your like mindfulness practice look like?
Haphazard. So when I started on mindfulness journey, I kind of, and the way I describe this for people as well, because I think there's a misconception between mindfulness and meditation. I think in the same way, like if I wanted bigger biceps, right, I would go do bicep curls in the gym, right? And that extent, like that's just an exercise that I'm doing to strengthen a muscle. And meditation, in my mind, is an exercise you do to strengthen the muscle of mindfulness. That's how I understand that. So when I stumbled into mindfulness back in the day, like for the first year, I used Headspace, right, on my phone, didn't break kind of the streak, meditated, well, I got just short of a day, like 361 days or something like that. And in all honesty, like as soon as I broke that streak, I knew I was never going to do this daily again, right? There was some part of this ego where it's like, oh, there's too much work getting here. But that aside, what that did was, that's, as I said, like I've retained some of that kind of muscle, like literally in the same way that even after a physical injury, like if you're fit, there is that muscle memory, like your body remembers these things. So I now kind of meditate some mornings, right? And I meditate for 10, 15 minutes, doing normal, Vipassana, just kind of breath work stuff. I kind of try and write something in the morning, some kind of your morning pages, or if it's not in the morning, just elsewhere. And then I've learned to kind of meditate whilst running. So oftentimes I won't take my headphones out for a run. And what I'll just do is I'll literally just count every second step that I take. And I'll just get into kind of that groove. So I think there's multiple ways for me to keep that muscle fit, essentially, and just keep that mindfulness and awareness about kind of what is happening around me. Like, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? So as I said, I think it's more, I call it haphazard. It's like more ad hoc, right? I don't have things that I feel anymore that I need to do every single day to feel grounded or calm or at peace, whatever kind of words you want to use.
Yeah. For me, it's like trying to become more aware of like how I'm feeling and how I'm doing, and if I'm distracted. One of the questions I love in the Tim Ferriss's book Tools for Titans is like, what do you do when you feel distracted or unfocused? And a lot of people have different approaches. Take a walk, take a run, whatever. And it's so weird how you can be unaware of how you're actually feeling. Like it's such a bizarre thing that you can just be kind of and there's this anxiety that's ramping up in you, but you're not even. And it's like I'll notice myself feeling tense more, and I'll take a deep breath, and I'll be like, whoa, I was like really just like laying down watching TV or something, and I'm tense about what I'm watching. And I'll be like, wow, like I was so tense right there. It's such a strange thing.
Yeah. And that, like what you described there, in my opinion, is exactly what mindfulness is, right? I think many people go into that notion of, I need to meditate, I need to be mindful, which means I have to clear my mind of all thoughts, right? Everything needs to be perfect. There's this kind of, padded white room, and you just float into it, and you just kind of at peace, and you're kind of zen there. And that's not what it is, right? Mindfulness is just being aware of these things that are, that are just there. Like I wanted to kind of judge those things, but just seeing them in a non-judgmental way and just acknowledging them, right? And sometimes it is not about even taking an action. It's just saying, well, you know what, that is so. I think the most fun story that I have in this regard is in the year that I stumbled into mindfulness, I also ran my first and only marathon. And I'm a big boned guy, at least, right? I'm not built for long distances. And I ran 2,000 kilometers that year, did a sub 4 kind of marathon. And due to kind of the story where, and I'm not going to tell the whole story of how Buddha became Buddha, right? But where he's sitting under the Bodhi tree, and then eventually Mara, the demon, comes, and she comes to tempt him because he's there and he's trying to be mindful, trying to meditate, and Mara constantly comes back, and eventually he just says, "Hey Mara, I see you," and he eventually says to Mara, "Come have tea with me, come sit down," right? And he invites this kind of negative thing in. And with the marathon, what I literally did was every single kilometer, as soon as my watch beeped, right, I would just say, "Hey Mara, I see you." And that was just that very simple thing for me, saying, you know what, new kilometer, I don't know what this kilometer holds. I've heard about this wall that's coming up where everything in my body is going to break down. I've never been there, but hey, I see you. Like, I know you're there, and that's okay. Like, I'm not going to judge you. I'm just going to keep on putting one foot, in front of the other. And I think like that's in my mind is that sometimes these things sound very esoteric, but it's just that. It's just seeing what is already there.
Yeah. What is it like to be building a company, a SaaS product in like this like mindful way? It's like a lot of times like the pattern is you build the thing, you're anxious, you're working, you're da 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 da, you get the success, and then you're like, oh, I need to learn to relax, and then you like you go off and do something else. You become an author, you become like I love the interview you did with Leo Widrick of Buffer, and how he transitioned into coaching and stuff. But then like for you to be building something from the ground up and doing it in like a fully, kind of mindful way, what's that like? Like are you like, do you get stressed out when you're working? Like, do you get into that different state of mind, that different mode, or is it pretty balanced?
No, I don't think it's balanced, right? So, and like the best story I have is I had some late night calls last night because I live in a beautiful country, but the time zone is crappy relative to kind of like the center of the universe, which is obviously the United States of America, right? So I had late night calls, and this morning when I caught up with my wife, and she asked, "How's the calls? Blah blah. How am I feeling now?" And I said, "You know what? It feels like Cogsy is in limbo, right?" And like limbo is just the word I use. Cogsy isn't really in limbo, but that's how it feels like. And she called me on it. Like she said, "Listen, you're like, you need to change this language. Like this is not helpful to you." But I tell that story because that's still sometimes how it feels, right? It's still like I'm still this ambitious guy that sometimes wants to accomplish 80 hours worth of work a week, or progress, make 80 hours worth of progress a week, even when I rationally know that no smart person has that much productive hours in them, right? No knowledge worker, at least. Plus, I know that kind of the collateral damage that creates for me, for my family, for my friends, people that are close to me. So I know, as a rationally, I know all these things now, and yet I still find myself figuring those things out. And again, like I think my gut feel here is, I don't think that will ever go away. When you're ambitious, when you're doing something that means a lot to you, again, like I think the ego just needs to be acknowledged, right? If there was no ego, we would not have makers, we would not have creators, we would not have innovators, we would not have authors, we wouldn't have these things. We would have no progress, because why would you do that? So I think like that is always part of the equation, and I've not kind of completely figured out for myself. All I know is, at least part of my own life profitability here, is I now spot those things sooner, the things where I'm compromising, the things that are leading to kind of greater life costs or life losses. I spot them sooner, and I can take corrective action, or I can take alternative action at least. So that is what it feels like. Like I'm just as ambitious as before. Like no, it's like it's to some extent like no amount of success makes me less ambitious, because again, like I mentioned challenges earlier. Like money itself does not motivate me. Like other things motivate me, right? So anyway, there's a whole tangent there, but to your point, like to your question, like the only thing that's really changed is my ability to be aware of the things that are not great much sooner than I was in the past.
Right. That's awesome, man. Well, this has been a great little chat. I appreciate it. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having
Where's
me.
the best place for people to, follow you online, find out more about all the stuff that you got going on?
Yeah, so best place probably is my personal website, adii.me, adii.me. Um, 80 because I decided on a nickname when in the year that the Wii had come out, so I thought I was being clever, and now I need to always
What
kind
is
of
this nickname thing? I feel like I remember I
so
heard you on one podcast say
yeah,
something about your name is a made up name or something. I was like, is
yeah,
that? I don't even remember if
yeah.
is it?
Yeah, my birth name. So I'm Afrikaans, right? My first language, which is very similar to Dutch, for those who are not
Right.
familiar. So my birth name is Adii Pienaar, and even I like my tongue does not roll the same way in English. So like the obvious thing would have been to use Adrian. I
Uh,
just hate Adrian, so I was like, no, not gonna do that. So decided on 80. Initially called
hey,
myself
that's
80
cool.
Rockstar, so didn't even call myself by my real surname for the longest time.
Really?
Kind of building, WooThemes, WooCommerce. I was just known as 80 Rockstar. But yeah, so
That's awesome.
now I'm 80. So anyway, personal website 80ii.me. That's also where the podcast lives. The book, all the details are there. And for anyone that wants to kind of turn more of their working capital, if you're an e-commerce brand, wants to turn your kind of working capital into cash and use that, like either kind of buy yourself something nice or reinvest it into growth things, you can have a look at cogsy.com. We'll be launching the first version publicly probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks.